During World War II, Japan's Matsuhiro Watanabe was known as a sadistic prison guard who made POWs' lives a living hell. Olympic athlete Louis Zamperini was one of them, and his life would forever be changed the day he met the man also known as the Bird. Looking back at Louis's childhood, we can see how he began a life with a will to survive his enemies. He was born January 26, 1917, in Olean, New York. His parents were Italian immigrants. He had an older brother named Pete and two younger sisters. He spoke no English, and this made Louis's life hard throughout his school years. The bullies targeted Louis and began to beat him up. His father taught him how to box to defend himself. He found out that he was a really good fighter and started beating the bullies up instead. Louis was always getting in trouble, and according to a remembrance broadcast by Cheryl Corley on Chicago's news station NPR during the soundbite of the movie Unbroken in 2014, Louis said, "They started talking about what to do with me, and the police chief said, 'We've been chasing him all over town for years. I suggest running.'" This led to Louis's older brother Pete deciding to encourage Louis to take his talents of being able to run away and use them in a more positive way. His brother talked him into joining the high school track team. This turned out to be a great idea. In 1934, Zamperini set a world interscholastic record for the mile. Setting the record helped him to get a scholarship to the University of Southern California. And this led Louis to going to the 1936 Olympics on the U.S. team and racing in the 5,000-meter race. He was 19 years old and the youngest U.S. qualifier ever in this event. On to his next adventure. Zamperini enlisted just a few short years later in the United States Army Corps. He became a bombardier during the World War II. It was during a rescue mission with bullet holes in his plane that him and 11 other men went down into the ocean 850 miles west of Oahu. Louis was one of the three survivors along with pilot Russell Allen Phillips and Francis McNamara. They were on a life raft in the middle of the ocean. The men would catch rainwater and fish to survive. They fought off sharks, and they even capsized during a storm. Unfortunately, on the 33rd day, McNamara died. Louis and Russell Phillips, or as they called him Phil, reached land on the 47th day. But to their surprise, they landed on the Marshall Islands and were immediately taken captive by the Japanese Navy. Taken to the Japanese prison camp, they spent 2 years there. During this time in the prison camp, Zamperini continued to show his strength physically and mentally. The officer in charge at this camp, Matsuhiro Watanabe, was a man who came from a wealthy family and was used to having power. He was upset that he was denied commission and instead assigned to the prison camp. He turned his anger toward the prisoners. According to Thomas Doherty of the Journal of American History, in his article Unbroken, A Devil at My Heels, published in 2014, Watanabe seemed to have singled out Zamperini because of his fame as an Olympic athlete, and because Watanabe detected in Zamperini a sort of kindred inner strength that the Japanese commander was determined to crush. Louis was beaten over and over. One story is told of Louis being forced by the Bird to hold a beam above his head. And if he were to drop it, the guard was supposed to shoot him. It is said that he held the beam above his head 37 minutes. And when it came down, instead of letting the guard shoot him, the Bird began to give Louis the beating he would never forget. Louis withstood several of these trials during his time there. The Bird was later included in a list put out by General Douglas MacArthur as one of the top 40 most wanted war criminals. In addition to these horrific events that Louis Zamperini faced during these times, he had to come home and try to put all this behind him. Returning from war, Lewis married Cynthia Applewhite. They had a son and they had a daughter. According to an article written by Clayton Crabbe, the rest of the story, The Life of Louis Zamperini After Unbroken, it says he suffered from PTSD when he was back at home, which included nightmares and a drinking problem. Most of the stories we hear of Louis don't include the one of him after the war ended. Zamperini's wife, Cynthia, led him to attend a Christian crusade where he became a born-again Christian. He displayed a true Christian heart by forgiving all of the men who imprisoned him during the war. For all those reasons, that is why I admire the courage and the example of bravery Louis displayed right through the end of his life. From a rough childhood to an Olympic star, then to survive the sea and a sadistic war criminal. Suffering a disorder, PTSD, Zamperini proved he was a very strong and courageous man. In a documentary with Paul Henreid called Louis Zamperini Documentary in 2014, Louis talks about when he would run in high school. They started chanting his name, and he was surprised that anybody knew it. Well, today, his name is a well-known name across the country that he fought for. Not many men or women would want to live to tell the story that Louis did. And when he did, he inspired so many.